And it's my pleasure now to introduce back up on stage Deanna Stacy, closing keynote, Scaling CX Without Losing Your Soul. I love this title. And how to evolve customer experience through growth and transformation. Help me welcome her to the closing keynote.
Thank you. My slides can go up. Great, thank you. So first of all, thank you for those that are remaining here. I realize it's the last day of a long conference with a lot of different great speeches, and we're out at the airport, and people probably have to fly home or get back downtown. So thank you for staying here with me. I promise that I'll be fairly quick, but I also promise that what I'm really going to try and focus is really kind of simplifying a lot of the things that we've heard the last 2 days. The subtitle of my presentation is Transforming the Business While Protecting the Customer Experience. So I wanted to focus beyond just the times that you're scaling CX. I wanted to look at any transformation, and when you're transforming, how do you protect the business? Again, I'm going to kind of really simplify things down today, and you'll see my slides, and I have very simple illustrations. But first thing, who am I? A lot of you have heard me talk the last couple days. You know I came from Porter, but prior to that, I was at KPMG, PwC, and I worked on my own for 12 years. Really, my background is transformation. Transformation for CX, digital product, customer operations. I did that for many years, and then I went to Porter, and led the loyalty team, the contact center team, the transformation and digital product team. But all of that was around transformation. So that's who I am. Okay, so really what I want to do is let's go back to the basics. I know, again, there's been a lot of discussion about AI. There's been a lot of discussion the last couple of days. And I want to talk about basics. What do we need when we're looking at transformation to protect the customer? I believe we need to have roots in foundation, and that's where I want to focus today. So some of this is going to be quite simple. There are things that you've heard the last 2 days. It's not rocket science, it's stuff we all know, but I want to remind everybody of that as we're talking about transformation. So first of all, what's transformation? Right now, it's synonymous with AI, but that's an example of transformation, but that's not the only type of transformation. There are lots of different transformations. You could have restructuring, process changes. So I want to talk about my definition of it, which I think matches most people's. Transformation is when you're changing the heart of the business, and it impacts a lot of different areas of your business, if not every single area, along with your customer. So that's what transformation is. I'm going to give a few examples that I've seen through my career that I'll talk through the whole presentation. So first one, you've heard a bit, those that sat in the last fireside chat with Kezia have heard me talk about the Porter transformation. That was the largest transformation I went through for my career. We changed every single system, every single digital product, the brand, the service levels, regulatory, legal. So that was the largest change, and obviously there was a massive impact to the customer. But I also worked off and on 10 years with the customer in my former life that was more B2B, and they were a retail distributor. And they lost one of their largest key accounts. It's actually a large retailer, we all know, and they decided not to renew their contract. So that transformation was downsizing. It was cost efficiency. It was figuring out how to extract that key account from the business. In other examples, I worked with an insurer, and they were changing their broker connectivity system. So how the insurer was going to deal with their brokers, who then dealt with customers. So their underwriting, their claims, that sort of thing, obviously impacted across the business. And the last example I'll give is I worked with a large advertising company in Toronto. They did digital advertising along with traditional radio, TV, and PR. And they decided that they wanted to change how they worked with their clients to really move from an account management to more of a project agile delivery. So I went in and did that, but that again was an example of transformation. So now, as we're talking about transformation, what are the things that we need to think about when we're talking about getting back to the basics? Okay, I know governance is boring. But it is pretty critical when you're talking about large transformations. I purposely am using an orchestra with a conductor. And the reason why I'm looking at doing that is because I believe that what governance does is it aligns everybody as you're moving forward. And that's why it's critical. Now, what is governance? We know it could be status meetings, how you're prioritizing, different processes around how you're leading change. But ultimately, that's the goal. Two things I want to say on governance. One is when you're building your governance, make sure it matches the organization and the type of transformation. So the Porter change I talked about literally could have 5 different orchestras with 5 different conductors with one big conductor at the front. We had to do a ton of governance from stand-ups, scrums, up to the board meetings. Really, we selected and developed a new prioritization and intake process, for example. But then I mentioned the advertising company. We went really light on governance. We really only needed to meet with our leaders to talk through the change once every 2 weeks. And then we had meetings with the leaders or the directors that were actually leading the change a couple times a week. So much lighter, much different. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is know your baseline experience. Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot one thing that I will mention. The other thing I want to say about governance is be prepared to break it. And what I mean by that, and maybe break is too harsh, but be flexible with it. So there are times that you can't wait till that next meeting to decide if you're going to add on new scope because of something that needs to change. So when we're at Porter, for example, we had planes coming. The date was not changing. But we found, for example, that we suddenly needed to have kiosks at Pearson. We hadn't planned for that. We had systems we had to change we didn't know. We had regulatory changes that even the regulatory bodies didn't know we were going to have to do. So I couldn't wait a month or 2 to have those discussions. So we didn't use the governance process. We'd go straight to the president, for example, or send out an email to try to get approval on how to make those changes. So just be prepared with the governance, as I said, to break it when you need to break it. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about when I'm talking about basics is know your baseline experience. And we talked a little bit about this with Kezia too, but understand before you make any change to your customer experience, what is it today? What is your journey? Make sure you have all of your metrics. Make sure you understand that. One of the things we did at the very beginning with Porter, and the marketing team did this, is actually did detailed research on the brand to understand what the perception was of the brand before we even started to change it. That research actually allowed us to build on the brand and expand that. One of the things I forgot to mention with Kezia as well is while we were building, actually, I'll just skip that. But so as I said, know your own baseline experience. Be clear on where you're going. For everybody, what does that mean? Vision, objectives, how are we going to measure success? So be clear on that. And I think everybody understands that. I think what I'm seeing recently with organizations where they're starting to fail is they're not actually thinking about the customer experience when the transformation doesn't directly, or they think doesn't directly impact the customer. So when you're talking about cost efficiencies or layoffs, restructuring, what's happening is when you're looking at that vision, or you're looking at those objectives, what organizations are doing is they're sitting there and thinking, okay, well, we want to reduce by 10%. But they're not thinking, how do you impact the customer? Now, the fact of the matter is, in those situations, you might have to negatively impact the customer. But when you, at the upfront, when you first start to think about it, you need to think and build some guidelines around how you will impact them. So I like to do guiding principles in these sorts of things. So we went through the cost reductions at Porter a couple times, and one of our guiding principles is we might impact service, but we're not going to negatively impact brand. And that's something that we try. Now, sometimes there was debate about what would impact brand, but we really tried to look at that. Another example I'll give is the organization I mentioned that lost their key account. So they knew they were going to have to restructure their service to all of their customers. So one of the things we did up front is we said, okay, we will change timing, but for our key accounts, we will not reduce their service levels. So if they have same-day delivery today, they will continue to get same-day delivery. But For our independent customers, the smaller ones, they might have their service level changes. So it's really important up front to understand how you want to impact those customers. The other thing I'd say is even when it's a CX change, I believe that organizations think, okay, well, it's a real positive thing. We're putting in a business class or putting in a new lounge. And that's great, but they're not thinking, well, is everybody impacted positively like that? Or do we have a rule that says certain segments, as long as they're not negatively impacted, then the change is okay? Okay, plan change for customer and team members. So in my time doing transformations, I feel that organizations are much, much better now at thinking about change, doing impact assessments, understanding where they need to go, change strategies. When I started, it was really hard to get organizations to think about that earlier on. They wanted to wait till you're closer to launching something and then say, okay, we'll do some training. So I think they're much better. I do think, though, they're better for team members, for internal team members when we talk about change management. We're not always thinking about the customer when you're looking at change. So, and particularly again, when we're looking at, when we're looking at those types of projects or transformations that don't obviously impact customers. Again, like when you're doing restructurings and reorganizations. So what do you need to think about when you're talking about change? One, make sure you're thinking about the customer earlier on. Two, include them in the process. And that's actually not that hard to do. So for B2B, we did things like for the logistics provider I mentioned, we had our sales and our account managers work with those stores that were going to be impacted. For the broker project that I talked about in transformation, we had a broker community from the very beginning, and that community even actually helped us to select the vendor for the system that we were changing. They were involved in the requirements. They were involved in vetting communications and out to the broker. So ensure that you engage them early on within the process. And the last piece I would say about change is how do you communicate with them? Again, that's much easier from a B2B perspective. B2C, that becomes tougher. But what you need to do is select, like, where are the tension points going to be? And then think through what those communications are. So for Porter, one of the biggest things is people were used to flying out of Billy Bishop. They did not know that Porter flew out of Pearson. We knew that that was going to be a tension point. We knew that we would have people arriving at Billy Bishop and not Pearson. So we did a campaign, website, emails, text to make sure that people knew we're not flying. Your flight, it is out of Pearson, not Billy Bishop. We still had people show up at Billy Bishop, but it could have been much worse. The other thing we did is we really focused on the experience is a brand new, great experience, but passengers need to know, particularly when they're flying, they want to know what that experience is. So even if it's changing for the better, they need to know what that looks like. So we did a whole experience, kind of animation on the website explaining that. Plus, we would send emails and texts 3 days before their flight to explain what that experience was. So the next piece, again, in looking at basics I want to talk about, is partners. Know who you're partnering with and make sure you're selecting the right partner. So it is impossible today, I think, to have a transformation where you're not going to have a partner. Technology, products, services, advisory, legal, at Porter it was, who's providing the food. You're going to have a ton of partners. So a couple things that are really important for partners. Make sure your due diligence and you're selecting a partner that represents you as a company for your customers effectively, also fits into your culture. I know that's easier said than done, and I know when you're through the sales process and looking at partners, you think you have a great relationship. It's important to do the due diligence, talk to the references they give, also find other people that have worked with that vendor and partner, and ensure that they're going to provide the service that you are hoping they will. The other thing I'd say is engage them through the process. So I've been on the partner side and I've been on the client side, and what always works is kind of integrating the partner into the teams as you're doing delivery. So scrums, through your governance process, for example. What that does is ensure you're aligned with the partner. It also raises their stakes. They actually feel more for actually delivering and what they want to deliver. And the last thing I'd say about the partner, and again, this might be a bit harsh, be prepared to fire them. And what I mean by that is if you've started and you start to realize they are not providing the service they said they would, you've worked with them, you've tried to provide the service, they're still not providing it, sometimes you're going to have a lot of problems at the beginning if you fire them, but in the end, it will be better for you. Don't wait too long. We did this at Porter. We had ground handlers, they call them. So not all airports are actually Porter staff, and that's the same with all airlines. So certain airports we were getting lots of complaints from customers. Our team members, our crew were seeing lots of issues. Even from the airports themselves were getting complaints. We worked with them. We put people there working with them. We hired managers to work with them, still had problems. And so we fired with them within a few months. There's a couple airports we did that. I had that issue with an AI vendor that I chose with the call center. I suspected, kind of felt there were problems. We'd been working with them a while on a chatbot. But as we moved into LLM and agent, I was busy on other things, couldn't focus on it, said let's move forward. And we then realized that they just could not provide the service they promised. So we terminated that within 6 months after we had renewed it. Sometimes you have to make those hard decisions to move forward. So the last thing I talk about is measuring your success and reiterating. And I want to talk specifically about when you go to market. So, and actually, for those that were at the presentation yesterday on Tennis Canada, I found it really interesting because it talked a bit to what I'm going to talk about, which is when you first launch, you are going to have problems. Nothing's perfect. But if you're not fixing those problems quickly, you're going to lose those customers. So put things in place so you're getting data really quickly, and that data is not just your regular CSAT NPS data, it's also you're getting input from your frontline team members. So we had things set up with the contact center, for example, that was delivering back feedback. And also from our airport staff. We were meeting multiple times a day. I had technology teams and other teams we had shifts for 24/7 so we could make changes quickly. The other thing, and Winnie mentioned this yesterday too, is make sure you've got the decision makers there. If I couldn't make a decision, I was quickly going to get decisions so that we can make changes quickly. One of the changes we made is we were trying to give people and allow them to go to the front of cabin because it was empty and we were trying to get people to understand what that experience was. So we'd say, great, we're going to put you front of cabin. And with certain tickets, with the system that we had, we actually weren't able to upgrade them. So, there was an issue with the reservation system. We couldn't fix that very quickly. We built a whole new website to allow teams to then move them. Another example I'll give is that the broker community that I mentioned with that broker project, when we launched, we worked with the broker community, so we were meeting with them a couple times a day to understand the things that they were seeing. I actually would also talking to our broker support team, and there were some pretty fundamental issues. There's one in particular I remember, and it turned out it took us a while to figure it out. It wasn't a system issue, it was a process issue, but I literally sat with the broker support team with a team of people, and we figured out it was a process issue, and we were able to then fix that. And I've just rushed through this, partially because I know everybody wants to leave. So I'm just going to end to say that ultimately what I wanted to say today is that as we're doing these large changes, if you haven't done those basics, if you haven't put those roots in place and that foundation, you won't be successful. I know we can have all these tools and AI, but we need to have those basics. You need to know where you're going, have your governance, what's your baseline, manage change effectively, and then measuring success and reiterating. Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Okay, thank you.